The early morning sun filtered through the oak branches outside my window, casting dappled shadows across the driveway. It promised to be a serene day in our tranquil suburban haven. The cul-de-sac, with its identical houses and neatly trimmed lawns, seemed like a tableau of peace, a postcard of the American dream. Yet, beneath the pristine surface, discord simmered quietly. Karen lived 3 houses down, her abode distinguishable by its perfectly manicured lawn and rose bushes trimmed with military precision. She was a fixture in the neighborhood, often found patrolling the sidewalks with a clipboard in hand. The clipboard was both her weapon and her shield, a literal and figurative barrier between her and the world she sought to control. It was the badge of her self-appointed authority, a portable pedestal from which she dispensed her brand of order. I first noticed her petty machinations when she left a neatly typed note on my windshield. It was a windy day, and the paper fluttered slightly. A kite tethered to my car by the weight of complaint. The note was succinct, a single sentence laden with passive-aggressive undertones. "Your hedges are encroaching the sidewalk by approximately 6 inches. That was Karen. I folded the note carefully, tucking it into my pocket as I surveyed the alleged crime. The hedge in question was a humble affair, more ragged than unruly, its leaves whispering softly in the breeze. 6 inches seemed a trifling offense, unlikely to topple the neighborhood order, but to Karen, it was an affront to the sanctity of shared spaces. Her vigilant oversight extended beyond greenery. I had seen her nearly every day, peering out from behind her curtains, a watchful eye ever ready to pounce on any breach of decorum. I imagined she had a map of the neighborhood spread across her kitchen table, dotted with pins, marking each tiny infraction, a general strategizing for a never-ending battle. I was not alone in being the recipient of her fastidious attentions. Each resident had their own tale of Karen's unsolicited interventions, yet, unlike many who muttered frustrations under their breath, I found her antics almost endearing in their predictability. There was something oddly reassuring about her persistence, a constant in an ever-changing world. But beneath my calm acceptance lurked a quiet defiance. I refused to let her dictate the rhythms of my life. My hedges remained as they were, a silent testament to personal freedom. The world would go on spinning regardless of their 6-inch transgression. The tranquility of our neighborhood was only disturbed on the rarest occasions, such as when the scream of sirens pierced the air, a sound more alien than a bird's song at dusk. That morning, as I sipped my coffee, an ambulance pulled up near my neighbor's house across the street. Its lights flickered urgently, a red and blue dance of life and death, a stark reminder of fragility. I watched from my window, the coffee mug warm between my hands. It was an intrusion of reality into our constructed idyll, a reminder of life's unpredictability. Yet, it was a siren song for Karen, a call to arms she could not ignore. The ambulance had parked haphazardly, its bulk occupying part of her precious parking spot. I could almost feel her indignation from where I stood, a palpable force in the air. I knew, in that moment, she would not let it rest. And she didn't. What happened next was both inevitable and absurd, a microcosm of her unyielding nature. As the paramedics worked briskly, Karen stepped out, her expression a mask of righteous fury, a storm contained within a single person. I marveled at her audacity, her unwavering commitment to form over function. It was both a spectacle and a tragedy, a moment where priorities clashed so profoundly. Little did she know the chain of events she was about to unleash, a sequence of unintended consequences set in motion by her own hand. The sky was an indifferent gray, as the day unfolded with an air of tension that seemed to cling to the neighborhood like a stubborn fog. The incident with the ambulance had somehow not yet reached its inevitable conclusion. It was as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for Karen to make her next inevitable move. Karen, fueled by an indignation that bordered on the theatrical, had taken to the streets, or rather, the email threads with a vengeance. She wielded the HOA rulebook like a knight's sword, slicing through any semblance of community spirit with her rigid interpretations. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on me. This was not a struggle for justice, but a quest for control, a misguided attempt to assert power in a world that often left her feeling powerless. Her latest decree was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense. A new set of rules appeared overnight, delivered with the precision of a military campaign. They demanded compliance with such trivial matters as the angle of one's garden gnomes and the permissible hues for porch lights. It was both comic and tragic, a testament to the human need to exert dominion over the most inconsequential details. The real venom, however, lay in the citations. They fluttered down like autumn leaves, each one bearing the mark of Karen's relentless scrutiny, the odd placement of a recycling bin, the slightly overgrown hedge. It seemed nothing was too minor to escape her notice. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, their resentment simmering just beneath the surface. Karen had become the caricature of authority gone awry, a figure both feared and pitied in equal measure. Yet, it was the gossip that spread like wildfire, igniting the dry grass of suburban life with tales of Karen's latest exploits. Stories of her calling 911 on the ambulance had morphed into urban legend. Each retelling added new layers of absurdity. One claimed she'd attempted to tow it herself, or another that she had demanded it display a residential permit. It was all ridiculous, of course, but these tales served as a mirror, reflecting the bizarre reality of living under Karen's reign. In the midst of this chaos, I found myself an unwitting participant in her drama. My position afforded me a unique perspective, a vantage point from which I could observe the unfolding saga with a detached amusement, even as I felt the oppressive weight of her edicts. Karen saw herself as the guardian of order, but in truth, she was the architect of discord. As I walked through the neighborhood, the faint murmur of discontent was all around. The leaves rustled with each whispered complaint, the wind carrying their words from porch to porch. There was a shared understanding among us, an unspoken agreement to endure this farce with patience and subtle defiance. The turning point came, as such moments often do, unexpectedly. A citation appeared on my own doorstep, a petty note about the height of my grass. It was a small infraction, easily rectified, but it marked a shift in my perception. Karen had crossed a line, her crusade for control now encroaching into my personal space. In that moment, I felt a stirring of resolve. I would not be drawn into her spectacle, nor would I become another casualty of her misguided quest for order. There are battles worth fighting, and then there are those that must simply be endured until they fade into memory soar, leaving only the faintest echo of past absurdities. The sky remained gray, unchanged by our small dramas, yet, beneath its watchful gaze, we lived out our roles, each of us navigating the absurdity with a quiet dignity that Karen could never quite comprehend. The afternoon sun slanted through my window, casting elongated shadows like fingers stretching across the room. It was a peculiar sort of warmth, one that seemed to pulse with the tension still lingering from the morning's events. Karen's shrill insistence on calling the police over an ambulance parked in her precious spot had left the community in a state of taut disbelief. The neighborhood was a small pond, and she had hurled a stone, leaving ripples that would take time to settle. I glanced at the notepad on my desk, the pages filled with detailed observations. Each line was a testament to Karen's reign of terror in our little HOA fiefdom. It wasn't the first time she had overstepped, but this was the most audacious. The ambulance had been there for a reason, and her petty grievance had crossed a line, even for her. My fingers tapped a rhythm on the desk, a subconscious drumbeat of contemplation. Karen's actions had always been a source of frustration, but this was different. This was an opportunity, not for revenge, but for resolution, a chance to enlighten the board. to peel back the layers of her tyranny and let the light of reason shine through. I had taken photographs, careful and discreet, of Karen's various transgressions, her car parked illegally, her unauthorized modifications to her yard, the noise complaints that had been ignored. Each image was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that I was determined to solve. The plan was simple, yet intricate, a subtle counter to her overt aggression. I would compile everything into a presentation, a veritable dossier of her misconduct, but it wasn't enough to merely document her follies. I needed a narrative, a thread that wove through each incident with clarity and purpose. As I worked, I could hear the muted hum of life outside, children playing, the distant whir of a lawnmower, the occasional bark of a dog. It was all so normal, so beautifully mundane, yet beneath it all lay the quiet undertow of our shared discontent. A community held hostage by one woman's whims. Karen's voice echoed in my mind, her complaints always seasoned with the same arrogance, the same unyielding belief in her own righteousness. It was that certainty I aimed to unravel, to expose the cracks in her carefully constructed persona. She wasn't just a thorn in our collective side. She was a symptom of a larger issue, one that required not just documentation, but confrontation. The board meeting was set for the following week. I could already picture the scene in my mind: the horseshoe table, the uncomfortable folding chairs, the air heavy with anticipation. Karen would be there, of course, her steely gaze daring anyone to challenge her. But this time, the challenge would be met with prepared resolve. As the evening drew near, I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. I wasn't doing this out of spite. There was no satisfaction in seeing her brought low, only a grim necessity. Community was about more than just proximity. It was about harmony, about finding balance amidst the chaos. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The sun's warmth on my face felt different now, a soft glow of potential. This was more than just an act of retribution. It was a chance to restore what had been lost, to bring peace not just to our neighborhood, but to myself. The decision was made, the course was set, and as night fell, I felt a quiet determination settling over me. The storm had passed, and in its wake lay the promise of a new dawn. The air, thick with tension, hung heavy as I watched Karen retreat from the commotion she had summoned. Her heels clicked sharply against the asphalt, a staccato rhythm that punctuated the chaos she had left in her wake. The ambulance, once a lifeline, now bore the marks of her pettiness, a symbol of bureaucracy twisted by personal vendettas. I stood at a distance, a silent observer of the unraveling scene. The neighborhood was an orchestra of murmurs, whispers weaving through the warm evening air, faces peeked from behind curtains, curiosity tethered to discretion. They knew better than to interfere. Yet voyeuristic intrigue held them captive. Karen's audacity was not a surprise. She had a history, a pattern as predictable as the seasons. But this time, it was different. The stakes were higher, the consequences more dire. A life was on the line, and Karen, with her misplaced priorities, had crossed an invisible line, one she had drawn herself. I felt a quiet resolve settle over me, a calm in the storm. It was time to act, not with the bluster she'd wielded, but with precision and purpose. The law was a patient ally, a subtle force against her flagrant disregard. I knew its language, its rhythm. It required no spectacle, only steady hands and unwavering focus. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, each piece a note in a larger symphony of justice, witness statements, photographs, and records, all orchestrated into a narrative that was both undeniable and irrefutable. The HOA bylaws, once a tool of her oppression, would now serve as her undoing. The irony was not lost on me. Karen, the self-proclaimed sentinel of order, would find herself ensnared in the very net she had woven for others. Her downfall would be as meticulous as her tyranny, each step designed to highlight her transgressions with the stark light of truth. As I compiled my case, my mind wandered to the lives she had disrupted, the neighbors she had alienated with her ceaseless demands and self-righteous decrees. They were silent witnesses now, their relief palpable in the shared glances and nods of understanding. There was solidarity in their silence, an unspoken agreement that she had gone too far. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, the morning sun casting long shadows on the pavement as I approached the courthouse. My resolve was steel, my path clear. The proceedings were swift. The evidence laid bare like a tapestry of consequence. Karen's bravado crumbled under the weight of the truth. Her protests, a muted echo against the inevitable. As I left the courthouse, the air felt lighter, the neighborhood a mosaic of renewed hope and quiet triumph. Justice had been served, not with vengeance, but with the measured precision of accountability. Karen had learned a lesson, one that echoed through the community like a clarion call. In the aftermath, the ambulance returned, a silent symbol of resilience parked in its rightful place. It stood as a testament to the strength of unity, the power of calm resolve over chaos. And as the neighborhood resumed its rhythm, I knew that while Karen's reign had ended, the story of our quiet victory would linger, a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, was inexorable and sweet. The sun was just beginning to set, casting warm hues over the rooftops. As the aftermath of the chaos settled into a strange quiet, the ambulance had left, its urgent cargo safely on the way to cooler, more competent hands. The air felt lighter now, freed from the weight of Karen's earlier tempest. I watched from my porch, my breath visible in the cooling evening air, as neighbors emerged to survey the damage Karen had wrought on our sense of peace. Karen stood alone, her shadow elongated against the asphalt, looking smaller than ever before. There was a time when her voice, sharp and insistent, could silence a room. Today, though no one listened, her authority had evaporated, left hanging in the air like the remnants of a storm that had overstayed its welcome. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. Perhaps it was the irony of it all, a woman so obsessed with control, now facing the consequences of her own overreach. The irony was palpable, almost like a well-crafted plot twist no one saw coming. She looked around, seeking validation, support, anything to anchor herself. But the community had shifted. Unspoken agreements formed across glances and nods exchanged in the growing dusk. We were a neighborhood again, free from the invisible chains of her rulebook. A breeze rustled the trees, and with it, a soft murmur of conversation began among the neighbors. Not about Karen, no. That would be too direct, but about the small things that build a community. Gardens needing tending, children playing soccer, plans for a street party. And there she was, sidelined by the very fabric she had tried to weave too tightly. The irony was not lost on me. She had called the authorities to enforce something as trivial as a parking spot, and, in doing so, she had unraveled her own standing. I leaned against the porch railing, letting the wood press into my palms. The scene felt distant, yet intimate, like watching a play unfold where you know the ending but still savor each act. Her presence, once a storm cloud, had become a whisper in the wind. Someone must have said something to her. A single line carried by the breeze. It was barely audible but resonated with quiet finality. It was a release, a gentle but firm closing of a chapter. Karen's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving her body like air from a punctured balloon. She turned, slowly, walking back to her house with a step that was more resigned than defeated. In that moment, I felt a shift within myself too, a realization that sometimes the greatest power lies not in confrontation, but in the quiet resilience of a community coming together. We had all changed, grown without noticing it, like the trees that line our streets. We had weathered her storm, and were standing stronger for it. And so, the peace returned, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The world continued to spin, and we, the quiet, powerful chorus, resumed our lives with the knowledge that we had endured, and in doing so, had reclaimed our little corner of the world.